Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Maria Godoy. I'm a health correspondent with NPR, and I'm here today to talk with Chef Dan Barber. Many of you probably know Dan is a Michelin-starred chef. He is the owner of Blue Hill and Blue Hill at Stone Barns, which is really considered the model of the farm-to-table restaurant. It is literally on a farm, a working farm. And Dan is also a longtime vocal advocate for sustainable agriculture. I am really excited to be talking with you today because Dan and I share a belief that food is such a powerful lens to discuss some of the most pressing issues facing our society today, like nutrition and chronic obesity, environmental degradation, chronic disease, environmental degradation, and climate resilience. But the great part about using food as a lens is that you have a built-in audience that actually cares about these serious, heavy topics because we all have to eat. And so tonight, I hope that Dan and I can connect some of those dots for you about how all these things relate to food, using the lens of a really small unit of food, the seed. And Dan, one of the things you've talked about, and this is going to be our starting point, it's kind of a shocking statistic that 60% of the world's seed market, global seed market, is controlled by just 4 companies. And I wonder if we could start off by talking about just how does that market dominance impact what we grow and how it's grown?
I want to say what 4 companies owning seeds means, because it's not just seeds, it's our food. It's future food supply is in the hands of 4 companies. And those 4 companies are chemical companies. They're not seed companies. Seed companies haven't been able to compete in the marketplace of seeds over the last 30 years. There's a lot of reasons for that we can talk about, but the end game that we're at now is 4 companies. Global seed supply, which is our global food supply, is being controlled by 4 companies, and they're all chemical companies. Now, I don't think any of what I just said makes anyone hungry. The alarming part about it is the impetus to produce, the incentive to produce good food, nutritious food, delicious food, environmentally sound food that's grown in an ecologically responsive way. What incentive does a chemical company have to produce seeds that check off those boxes? None. In fact, it's the opposite. They have an incentive to produce seeds that actually require quite a bit of intervention. And the intervention is chemical. It's a fungicide or an herbicide. And that's a rigged game. Because if you can't make money selling seeds, and you can't because I own a seed company, and I'm saying that from experience, you have to make money on the intervention. And that's an alarming statistic. You said 60%. It's now at about 65%.
Wow.
And growing.
Wow. And growing, I take it.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about control of what we eat, and how does that limit what we eat in terms of pleasure, something everyone cares about, but also in terms of nutrition and health?
I haven't. You teed that up like Larry King with a softball. I'm glad people remember Larry King. I just dated myself, but it's okay. Because I brought on the plane a sample of a lettuce that I thought might answer a question like that. And it got a little crushed in my bag, so I'm opening it up. So it's been through a little frequent flyer mileage here. But this is a lettuce that was bred by a man named Bill Waycott. Bill Waycott was a Monsanto seed breeder. Monsanto, for those of you who don't know, is the evil empire of seed breeding. They're one of the largest seed companies in the world. They're also an agrochemical company. They were bought by Bayer recently, a German chemical company. And their history is really fraught. And Bill was the head lettuce breeder for Monsanto for 20 years and was disillusioned with Monsanto and the direction the company was headed and embarrassed. And at 68 years old, left the company and started his own company, a lettuce breeding company. And he left not because Monsanto was ruining the world, although it is, but because he saw an opportunity to breed nutrition into lettuce. And what he said, I thought, just a straight and clear, was this: Americans' number one vegetable consumed is lettuce. I didn't know that. Number one.
Wow.
Number one. And of those number one vegetables, there's only two varieties Americans eat: romaine and iceberg. Romaine and iceberg account for about 98% of lettuce. 95% of that lettuce is produced in one place. It's in Salinas in California. If you look at the world of consolidation, you kind of can get a better example than what I just said. Number one vegetable eaten in the United States, 95% of it, 98% of it is two varieties, romaine or iceberg. And romaine and iceberg have almost zero nutrition.
Yeah.
Zero. It's water. It's literally 98 or 99% water. Iceberg's 99%, romaine's about 97% water. Water that we're shipping across the country and across the world. And we have a nutrition crisis. So he said, enough with this. I'm going to breed for nutrition. He's not a flavor evangelist like myself. I met him because I started tasting his lettuces. And one that I was particularly struck by that I wanted to share with you is this. This is a prototype from his field, which very few people have ever seen. But he said to himself, if I'm not going to fight against romaine. I know romaine is predominant. Everyone's going to eat romaine salad. I'm not going to change that in my lifetime. But I can change romaine, and I can make it more attractive. And one way he did it was aesthetically. He said people who want to eat healthy salad, what do? They often go to spinach, because spinach is loaded with nutrition. And he finds that offensive. Why would you eat a vegetable like spinach raw when it was bred to be eaten cooked? So he put the two together and created a romaine lettuce that looks like a head of spinach.
Wow.
Yeah. And it has no spinach genetics in it. It's simply the selection process over time. This is about 7-8 years of work to get a head that looks nothing like romaine, very much like a spinach leaf, but opens up to make itself available to photosynthetic activity to the nth degree, really. And I'm enamored with this for a lot of reasons. One is the flavor. Two is the idea that he's going to Trojan horse nutrition into people's salads. Number three, gets you thinking when you eat a salad, when you eat these greens. Why do we think of salad greens as a vector for fat? Why is ranch dressing? And I actually kind of like ranch dressing. I'm not like I don't want to be, haughty about the thing. But it's like, why don't we think of lettuce greens, and this is Bill's question, as something that is just delicious on its own, that we celebrate as a truly, stunningly, jaw-droppingly delicious thing to eat for dinner or lunch? No? And that's what this is. And interestingly, and almost by accident, because he wasn't selecting purely for nutrition, he was really selecting for photosynthetic activity and a aesthetic appeal that people who go crazy over spinach for salad would go to this. And the testing came back 3 years ago, and what you're looking at is 3 times, except for iron, 3 times the nutrient density of a head of spinach. Wow. 3 times. And he did that overnight, 6 years, and did it with no funding. He did it himself. And to me, it's an example of what's possible in the world of seeds if we advocate for nutrition and flavor.
That's fascinating.
That's why I brought my
I do want to add there is a reason why we eat fat with vegetables.
Yeah.
I knew this. I covered nutrition for a long time. Just a little bit of fat sometimes helps you digest certain nutrients better.
They make them bioavailable,
bit,
definitely.
Yes.
But the ratio
you don't have to
is
drench
what I
it.
was.
Yes, a little bit of, and make it olive oil.
I'm not against that. I'm a chef. I love fat.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's the drenching of the salads that I find offensive.
So let me ask you this then. Why couldn't you breed this under why couldn't he do this when he was working for Monsanto?
He tried, and Monsanto wanted no business with something that was untested and had no clear path to capturing a market share, which is how these companies think. For the amount of money that they are spending, and they are spending a lot of money on marketing, It's not to lettuce greens, actually. It's to certain varieties of vegetables that have become predominant in our food system. I was sitting on a stage like this not long ago with a Monsanto executive, a vice president, who well, I did not like the guy that much, but what he said in the midst of our conversation was Monsanto spends $1 million a day on corn breeding. $1 million a day. You know, Bill probably spent 10,000 over the course of his 6 years. What if we spent $1 million on nutrient-dense vegetables and grains, for that matter, that started with the concept of we're only going to breed things that have tremendous nutrient density. And I'm saying that not because I wear a doctor's coat, I wear a different white coat, but I'm saying it because every time you breed for nutrient density, you breed for flavor. They're the same thing. The flavonoids that are in here have conspired to give you deliciousness, you know, and the carotenoids, the amino acids, all the things you know much more about than I do, work together to give us something that is delicious. And I don't know in our culture, and maybe I was growing up more in the 70s, and I think the prevailing wisdom about food that was good for you was like it didn't taste good.
Yeah.
I think that's like sort of an underpinning. It's so unfortunate. I mean, ask an Italian or a French person or a Chinese, you know, that's just crazy talk. But that is kind of a Puritan understanding. You sort of had to swallow food that was good for you. And what we know very clearly from testing varieties like this is it's actually backwards.
Right. Well, actually, it's funny. Dan mentioned this to me before, so I was like, is he right? I fact-checked him, and yes, I remember that we had reported in 2014 a meta-study of over 343 previous studies that looked at the nutritional content of like organic versus conventionally grown seeds, produce, actually, and they are higher in antioxidants. So
you fact-checked me.
I do.
Oh, God. All right.
Trust
I got to
but
be really
verify.
careful what I say. Because often I say things that aren't so factual. No, but that is proven. And the flavor of organic vegetables is, you know, it's just there's not even a competition. And I'm not saying that because I would prefer not to poison our environment. Of course, I would not like to, as all of us in this room wouldn't like to. But what I find offensive about the chemical industry is the use of that intervention prevents the plant from taking up the nutrition and the minerals and the vitamins and all the things that makes for deliciousness possible. So it's not so much that you're eating the chemicals, although that's the whole issue. The other thing is what it's robbing you of, which seems so unfortunate.
Right, because actually pests are sort of good in terms of creating antioxidants.
They are.
Those are the plant's natural defenses.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You summon the plant's energy and defense.
It's like lifting weights.
Well, it is, and I'm glad you raised that because I'll go to another part of this, which is what you're looking at is a seed that was bred organically. Now, I'm going to put you to sleep for the next 30 seconds, okay? But I'm going to do it anyway because what the hell? It's so important. No one talks about it. People talk about organic vegetables. I have met very few people who are interested in the topic of organic seeds, and there's a big difference. Because right now our government, the USDA, allows organic growers everywhere in the country to grow something organically but buy conventional seed. What is conventional seed? Conventional seed is, maybe I should take one step back if you don't mind, now that everyone's asleep and I can put this in, okay? Breeding is a lot of breeding is about taking two parent lines and you bring those parent lines together and you create a love child. And you have some idea of what the love child is going to look like because you know a lot about the parent lines. That's essentially breeding. You're making a lot of choices along the way when the cousins and the aunt, you know, all the family gets exposed or expresses itself in future generations. But essentially, you're just continuing to select the traits that you wanted from the parents. A parent that was darker green romaine for high polyphenols and antioxidants, and you want one that has a certain disease or fungal resistance. And you have those two parents, and you put them together, and you get both characteristics if you do your work right. That's essentially seed breeding. Okay. Once you're in the field and you're marrying the two parent lines together, the mama and the papa, you have a choice to make in that field. Do you spray a chemical do you put those parents through a chemical environment as they're producing their seed through the pollination process, or do you do it organically? Organically means no intervention, and you get huge loss in the field, and it's very expensive, and it takes a little bit more time to get a love child from the parent lines that you want. But what you're getting is a love child that is growing up in an environment that's not coddled. It's growing up in an environment, from what you said, that needs to fight to make it into teenager and adulthood. That's the food you want to be eating, because that's a strong plant. It's strong from the root system all the way up to the expression of the plant, which is to photosynthesize. And if you are growing up in an environment where you're coddled and never have to exercise that muscle, then by the time you reach maturity, you don't have it, period. Which is what the chemical industry wants, and gets us back to where we started. Why there's 4 companies that own 65% of our food supply, because that's what they want. You intervene on a weak plant, essentially, and you spray the problem away. But what if, instead of intervening, we thought about prevention? And prevention starts with how we raise the seed. What environment are we raising in? What are we kickstarting in that seed that is nature's ability to ward off pests and disease? And how can we do that to its fullest? And yes, farmers are very important. Soil health and rotations and overall ingenuity on incredibly interesting farmers all across the country. But if farmers don't have access to strong genetics in the plants, then the cake's baked. What are you doing? And right now, if you go to a Whole Foods, and I'm not saying anything negative about Whole Foods, but you go into Whole Foods and you're buying premium organic product, most of that seed is from conventional seed. And what gets me really in the kuchka is when people say, well, why is organic vegetables so expensive? Of course they're expensive. They're sitting ducks in the field. You know, what if we, instead of spending $1 million on corn genetics, which is essentially chemicals that are most appropriate for corn to survive in a monoculture of 20,000 acres, instead of doing that, why don't we invest in something like that? My friend and co-founder of Row 7 Seeds that I started said it just so clearly. We don't have a yield gap with conventional. Organic doesn't have a yield gap. It's not we can't feed the world. We have an R&D gap. Nobody wants to invest the expense that it takes in R&Ding organic seed. And for 40 years, we've R&D'd chemical seed. And that is out of the gate preventing our vegetables from thriving and depriving us of a lot of nutrition and deliciousness.
How much R&D is going into like a organic seed?
Less than 5%.
Of all, wow.
Of all R&D, less than 5%. And tell me how ironic not in a nice way, that it's 5%, and yet organic is growing anywhere from 8 to 12% a year. I mean, Americans have been waking up to organic for the last 20 years. 8 to 10% or 8 to 12% of Americans are buying more organic than they did the year before, yet the investment on organic seed is less than 5%. It makes no sense, except when you realize that the laws allow organic farmers to raise conventional seed. And that's the trip up. So where's the incentive to put the money in organic seed?
And well, that goes back to seed control, I guess, like who's supplying the seed.
Right. When you have 4 companies that are chemical companies and they are in the hands of the politicians who are creating these laws, really difficult to get mired in this mess that we're in.
Well, you know, I just want to go back to the concept of monocultures that we're talking about, because they have the financial incentive to create, like, you know, corn, for instance. I think corn and soybeans account for like 22% of acres planted. Does that sound about right to you? Right. I think I said that.
I say it differently. I say it's 190 million acres of some of the best farmland in the world.
Yeah.
190 million acres are devoted to 2 crops.
Well, so here's the thing. I don't eat that much corn and soybeans. So where is it going? Let's talk about that.
You eat meat?
Yes.
Then I'm assuming do you not eat all grass-fed meat?
I try to, but I don't eat that much meat, but yes.
But if you're eating meat, if you're eating beef and it's not on grass, then you are eating a lot of corn. And
right.
If you're eating chicken, you're eating a lot of corn. And if you're eating pork, you're eating a lot of corn.
Right.
And if you're eating processed food, you're eating a ton of corn and soybeans.
Yeah, that's a great point.
If you're opening a package of processed food, you're opening corn. Right. And you're filling up your gas tank with corn. So we're not eating any of the 190 million acres, not a drop. But boy, talk about inefficient food system that's ever been invented in the history of the world.
Well,
we funnel 190 million acres of 2 crops that we can't eat. And we funnel it through an animal that was built to not eat grain, actually. I mean, that's crazy. When you put it in that term, it's an herbivore. An herbivore has 4 stomachs, and it has something that you and I and all of us can't do. Walk outside, eat some grass, and convert that to fat and energy. We can't do that. A cow can very well, very efficiently. But we don't. We take it off of that really God-given miracle, which is sunlight feeds the grass feeds a cow, and the cow feeds us with incredible nutrition and protein. We've taken it off that system and devoted 190 million acres to feeding that beast, which is, we eat the meat, but how inefficient. What if we ate a mixed acreage of 190 million acres? How many people could we feed? How many people who are disenfranchised from a food system that's healthy? How many? I mean, you'd feed not just our population, but you'd be exporting a lot of food too.
Right, and actually I just want to connect one of those dots too when he was talking about the packaged foods. The fact that we have so much corn out there kind of it sort of helped fuel the growth of packaged foods too, ultra-processed foods actually, where you take that corn and you refine it and then you reprocess it into ingredients that are the backbone of ultra-processed foods, which are, overconsumption of which, and by the way, there's 73% of the U.S. food supply now, and overconsumption of which is linked to things like increased risk of cardiovascular disease, increased risk of obesity, increased risk of diabetes, increased risk of dying prematurely from all causes. So there you go.
That's
Seed
a slam
to
dunk.
health.
Seed to health.
Listen,
I just was talking. Where's Bon? Bon over there. He's a emergency room doctor and an amazing podcast. If you want to go into, I was on his show for about 15 minutes yesterday. But I made a connection that you just made, but I want to make sure we all hear it, which is you talked about our diets leading almost inevitably to some kind of health crisis at some point in our lifetime and prematurely. And the answer in our culture is to intervene with medicine. And we spend a lot of money investing in intervention. But isn't that the exact analog to what we were talking about with seeds? Instead of investing in the prevention and the strong possibility that plants and nature can defend against almost everything, and they can, we instead have a cultural paradigm that insists that intervention is the way to go. And that's such a crime. It's a crime for our ecological health and our environment, and it's a crime for our own health.
All right, and that's sort of the growing recognition and movement within the medical field that food is medicine, and that's kind of the big picture of what we're talking about, I want to talk about something else that happens with these seed monopolies that I'd love to hear more about from you, which is the fact that they limit what's grown in other ways too, because certain properties of these seeds become intellectual property that other people can't copy, like certain traits, right? So you can't, thanks to something called utility patents, which I wish you would speak more on and sort of give us an example of how that plays out in terms of what food we can and can't eat.
More soporific talk. Okay, so I'll say it as quickly as I can. There were laws passed very recently, like 1980s. Bob Dole actually has a name on something that was passed through the Senate that essentially allows for the first time in the history of the world, I'll say that again, first time in our 10,000-year history of domesticating plants, that you can own biology. You can own certain genetic traits. They call them novel traits. And you couldn't do that up until the 1980s, and it really didn't kick in when the Supreme Court okayed that. It really didn't kick in until the 90s. It really didn't kick in the last 20 years, which now it's gangbusters. And we can go back to our lettuce example. Part of the reason that I find Bill Waycott and this romaine spinach lettuce so brilliant is that lettuce is the most lawyered up vegetable in the supermarket. 70% of salad greens are owned by those 4 chemical companies. 70%. So now I'll give you my own analogy of being in a restaurant, being in the kitchen. You're making a dish, and I go for the red pepper, and a lawyer taps me on the hand and says, sorry, you can't use that because it's owned by this company. Or you can't use the combination of an onion and a pepper together. Literally, that's the analog. So what Bill's done here and what he's done in his breeding lines is to tiptoe through raindrops. He can't touch any of these genetics, so they go after you very, very, that's what Monsanto's famous for, is they litigate you up the gazoo and make a point. And the reason that lettuce is so lawyered up has to do with it being open pollinated, which means that if you go and grow a lettuce in your garden and you love it and you don't want to support a seed company or you don't want to support a chemical company, you could save the seeds of lettuce very easily. And when you save the seed and you plant it again, it breeds true, which means it will grow out and be the same thing. That's not true of a lot of vegetables, true of lettuce. So lawyers have come in and patented almost all the novel traits that you can see in a supermarket. And you can't, they've patented colors. They've tried to patent, and won for a few years, although it's been overturned, taste.
Wow.
Yeah. Can you imagine? That gets scary. It was a melon that was a deliciously sweet melon, and they figured out a way to work the patent on the novelty, which I read the whole thing. I couldn't figure the goddamn thing out. It was so weird. And just the concept of it is so peculiar. But that's where we're headed. And that's not slowing down. That's actually speeding up. So the idea that a breeder could actually get out there and breed something with all this nutrition is becoming less and less possible as we speak. And yet, here we are to end this on something more positive than my usual dystopian talk.
So
you can do it.
Because they're scared. That they might come up with something that it's too close in color.
Yeah, they stay the hell away.
Yeah.
So nobody's done spinach romaine, thankfully.
Well, so in terms of this loss of diversity, I'm wondering if you can speak to someone, what does that mean in terms of ecological health and diversity, like biodiversity, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We tend to forget that farms can be oases of biodiversity, not just health for us, but health for the environment. I think we tend to think of as farms as being, we should be less bad with our food purchases, so we're less destructive on the environment, because we have this sort of understanding, especially in America, that farms are not doing good for the environment. To produce food, there's a trade-off. For us to eat, we really need to do some kind of damage to the environment. That is just a complete falsehood from A to Z, and yet we buy it. And I had a conversation with Senator Bill Frist, who did a panel with yesterday. I think I kind of pissed him off because I said, he started the conversation on a phone call we had as prep to it. He started talking about conservation, and somehow it got on national parks. And I said, national parks, like conservation, they call it America's best idea. It's like America's worst idea. We have this understanding that you put a fence around wild nature because that's going to be the ecologically beneficial part of the world. But when we produce food, we go, hey, come on, we got to eat. It's ridiculous. It gives license to degrade farmland, which is preposterous for farmland, but also for us, because it most often, and I would say always, but I'm hedging here, most often produces food that's not that delicious. And so we're gypping ourselves just from 10,000-foot frame. The frame is farms have to in some way destroy for us to live on this planet. That's not true. And there are many examples of farms around the country that you can point to that show that they produce not only nutritious and delicious food, but a heck of a lot of diversity. And actually those things go hand in hand. And what we need to do to activate that is eat with a lot of diversity. And what you're pointing to is this funneling down of varieties. And that's what your 4 companies want. They want less diversity in the marketplace because they want less diversity in their chemical cocktails. What they are breeding for is single trait genes. And when you breed for single trait genes, you want chemicals that apply to those single traits. It's very hard to produce chemical regimens that really work in a diverse system. Very difficult. They're just not as applicable. And so it's very frustrating. In a monoculture system, it's heaven for a chemical. Heaven. You got one variety of one thing, and that's exquisitely vulnerable, and you produce a cocktail mix that works on that one variety, that one genetic trait. It's craziness. But a diverse system actually circles us out of that very quickly. What we need to do is eat a lot more diversity.
But okay, so this is a chicken and egg situation. How do you eat more diversity when there's not more diversity out there for us to eat?
Well, okay. I think we can look to farmers markets. I mean, there is still locally and regionally in almost every region of the country some really dynamic work going on with varieties. And supporting the farmers market is actually a way out of this mess. Most of those seeds are increasingly in the hands of the big companies, but there's still a lot of independent seed companies, small ones that are out there. They're regional. They're supporting the right kind of seeds. My issue with this, and I just say what I think is hopeful for the future, and another frame we need to wrap our minds around, is often you go to the farmer's market and you hear farmers and chefs like me evangelize old seeds. Because old seeds, were not corrupted, and they were passed down from our great-grandparents, and they were saved because they were very delicious or because they worked very well in certain regions. And there's a lot of beautiful genetic traits in that saving of seeds. The problem is, if you become too obsessed with the past, you quickly get very elitist, because growing varieties that are old just don't perform well in a field. That per acre, you fall right into the trap of the big seed companies, which say, how are you going to feed the world with those genetics? And you know what? They're right. So, and that's the problem with farm to table, and it's what I've had a late inning revelation about when I'm the farm to table chef, but I realized, like, it's very elitist to support those kind of seeds and these kind of farmers. Most people can't afford it, which is why the farm-to-table movement, which has been the most exciting social movement in America over the last 30 years, hasn't budged above 6% of purchases. It can't budge because people just the culture doesn't allow it, and people can't do it. So we have to democratize nutrition and flavor. And I think the way to do that is to take varieties from the past, genetic traits from the past, and marry them with modern varieties. Modern varieties have very good yield. Often they actually have good pest disease resistance. Keep those genetic traits regional. You keep them regional, chemical companies have no interest. Chemical companies want to grow a carrot in Michigan, Texas, Oregon, California, and China. You know what that carrot tastes like? Nothing. Because you're dumbing down the genetics to the point that you can apply a very consistent suite of cocktails. And that is what's happened in the seed industry. The way to fight back against that is the differentiation. I just want to be careful that we don't go too nostalgic for old varieties of carrots, and instead look to carrot breeders, of which there are a few left. There's 2 in the United States that are independent.
Wow.
2, the carrots. I didn't say, jackfruit. I said carrots. There are 2. One of them works on cucumbers half the time. So it's 1.5 public plant breeders, which means our tax dollars go to support these people. That's how we built our food system across the country. There's a land-grant college in every state, and that was created by President Lincoln because he recognized that we were terrible farmers, and we needed local adaptive seeds for these farmers to make it individually. And that rolled across the country. There's a land grant, at least one. In some states, there's 2, where your tax dollars go to support it. Unfortunately, there's very few independent breeders left because the support for these land grant colleges have gone under in the last 20 years. So we're down to 1.5 carrot breeders. But they've got varieties that do exactly what I said. They really do justice to the past, but taking into account the needs to really give yield and produce a carrot that's not $5 a pound. And they're doing it. It's out there. That's what this is. So I see a way out of this. We're going to have to play the long game here and get revved up about the fact that chemical companies are feeding us. Okay,
well, I'm very excited about this, but how do we get that 1.5 carrot guys to feed all of us? I mean, how do you scale that up? What can you do to support that?
I got a call from out of the blue 4 months ago. I started CCOM. I'm not here to promote it, but I want to say this, it's going to sound very promotional, but out of the blue, a guy called me and he said, I've been the head breeder for Syngenta. Now, Syngenta company is larger than Monsanto. Many people consider Syngenta to be the real evil player in the last 30 years. Okay, so just to give you the background, they just don't get the bad rap that Monsanto gets for a lot of reasons. Anyway, this guy was the head of global breeding for Syngenta, the head, number one. And he said that he was looking to retire, and his daughters were so embarrassed with his career and stopped talking to him and said, you should do something with your remaining years, and you should do something to help improve the world. And he said, so I'm calling you because I hear you're a seed company that's looking for diversity. I know all the breeders all over the world, that's what they want too. They want to breed diversity. Everybody's got a variety in their back pocket that the industry doesn't want. We explain why the chemical industry doesn't want it, but a lot of people don't want it. The processors don't want it, distributors don't want it, marketplace kind of doesn't want it either. And people aren't demanding it. So where's the pull-through? It's okay, you got a seed company that's really driven by chefs. Chefs have the pull-through because they're really are evangelizing for flavor, and there's a lot of flavor in this diversity. So that was 3 months ago. Last week, he's hired full-time for my company, which I really, it's amazing, yeah, it's amazing. I feel, and I'm learning how the world works from a guy like this, you know. I've told you stuff that I've learned. You really want to talk to how the food system works, it's here. And every time I talk to him, my mouth is just open. I'm just like, and the possibility of breeders out there that really want to do the right thing is everywhere. I've been talking to breeders in China. I've been talking to breeders in South America. It's so exciting, and it's there. What we have to do is create, you know, the demand for it. And so I feel, I forgot what your question is. Did I answer it? No.
Carrot and a half guy.
Oh, carrot and a half guy. Yeah. Unfortunately, you know, the land-grant university system is I don't think it's coming back. I don't think people ever recognize the value. You know, the land-grant university system was the only system that had public plant breeding in the world. We invented it. We literally invented it, and we put our money where our mouth is, and we invented the most scientifically advanced seeds that responded organically because it was before chemicals. Unfortunately, it's just with the ownership of genetics and the lack of support for state universities, which has plummeted in the last 20 years, breeding pros just gone under. So yeah, we're down to 1.5. But I don't know that that's the end game. I think there's ways to look at seed companies and private interests and people like you who need to demand for better food. And I think we can circle out of this pretty fast. 6 years.
But how do you get more investment to like help those breeders get off the ground?
Yeah, you know what we need is the pull through. We need to show that there is a demand for this. And I'll give you this story. Okay, I want to be careful of time. I'll tell you this. There was a breeder. This is how I started this whole thing because, as I said, I was farm to table. All I was talking about was farmers. This guy came into my kitchen. I invited into my restaurant. He came back to the kitchen midnight after a long meal. He was a seed breeder. His name is Michael Mazurek from Cornell University, a land-grant breeder. Squash, cucumbers, and peppers. Very brilliant young guy, and they're not hiring young people anymore. So he very, very brilliant. And I said to him, I was a little awkward in the kitchen as I usually am when I'm just awkward. Anyway, I said to him, I said, you know, if you're such a great breeder, why don't you breed a butternut squash that actually tastes good? Like, why do we have to add maple syrup and brown sugar to everything just to make it taste like squash? They got very serious quickly, and he looked at me and got close and like adjusted his glass. He's like, the reason I've never bred a butternut squash tastes good is because no one's ever asked me to breed for flavor. And that was the moment. I say all the time, it was like a curtain went down. It was before and after, because it was such a cavalier off the cuff question, provocative, stupidly, but actually ended up being actually the core of the issue. Why aren't you talking to people who care about flavor? Who are you talking to? First of all, so that was my whole journey. Of course, they're talking to the industry. The industry doesn't care about flavor, as we talked about. I talk about yield. They care about shelf life. They care about transportation. They care about water. Water. Breed varieties that take on water because water's where the weight is. And water was free for a long time. I mean, you know, Arizona, California, not so much. But free water, you get weight. And the farmer sells by weight, the distributor sells by weight, the processor sells by weight, marketplace sells by weight. So you're pretty much in the water game. And water washes out nutrients, it washes out flavor. So there's butternut squash. By the way, butternut squash is a superfood. It's a superfood. So I was like, wow, Like, so what does it mean if you were to breed a squash? It's asked the stupidest questions, like, what do you mean? And so we went to work, and he provided a prototype of a squash. I don't have that as a show, but it fits a little bit bigger than my hand. You might have heard of it. It's called honey nut.
Yes, yes.
Okay, honey nut was a conversation that happened 13 years ago. Now, just to your point of how do we do this fast, that's pretty fast, okay? That was an off-the-cuff, provocative conversation. He gives me a prototype. I went batshit crazy. I was like, I never knew squash could taste like this. Is so yellow. You know, you gotta kind of put sunglasses on it. It's like loaded. Beta carotene is 3 times per spoonful beta carotene than regular squash. And mostly he did it by forcing out water, by selecting against water. That's most of it. A lot of it was selecting with other varieties of squash, older varieties of squash. There's the old genetics, marrying it with new so it has the yield. Okay, so we bring it to I'm not going to tell you. Yeah, I'm going to tell you. Walmart distributor, okay? This was when I got excited about it. I was talking about all these chefs were using it. We had all these prototypes. We're going crazy. We're like, this is the future of squash. Give it to the Walmart guy because you need scale. You got to do it quickly. You know, here's nutrition in a cup, literally 1 serving, blows your mind. And the Walmart guy just looks at it and is like, oh my God, no one's ever going to buy this. Are you kidding? Who's going to pay 20% more for 40% smaller squash? By the way, this isn't a butternut squash. I said, yeah, it is. He said, no. We got a SKU for butternut squash. Butternut squash is, and he gives me the dimensions of what a butternut squash is. Exact measurement of what a butternut squash is. Because the distributors need to know how many are going to fit in a SKU. Because that's how the system works. And you plot out storage, you plot out transportation, you plot out the marketplace through SKUs. And the only way you get to exactly how many SKUs you're going to get is get to exact size of the squash, which is loaded with 80% water. I wish I could talk to this guy now, because here we are, 2024, our shrunken butternut squash, the honey nut, is grown coast to coast, literally Maine to Florida, Michigan, down to Texas, California, Oregon, and it just went into Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, Costco, and Walmart.
Wow.
Last thing.
Oh, yeah.
Farmers call it the money nut. Everyone said the farmers will never grow this because there is less yield. Of course, I mean, it is a little bit of an expensive squash. Not a lot. You get a lot for your squash, but for people who can't afford it, it could be out of their budget. And if you give us, 5 years, and we're putting a lot of investment, we're going to fix the yield problem. Look, butternut squash we eat today was invented in the 60s. And they've had 50, 60 years of a ton, millions of dollars to their R&D to get them the yield that they got. So we'll do it, just need a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we shouldn't be in this position. For the last 40 years, we should have been eating this squash, which I guess we could call a super duper food.
And by the way, as you were talking, I was reminded from our past reporting that sort of high water content, that to maximize the size, is one of the reasons why conventional grown produce, from our past reporting, conventionally grown produce has lower antioxidant levels because it's diluted in size. But are you really going to eat the whole thing?
That's right.
You know what I mean?
You got to eat a lot of it.
You got to eat a lot of it. And frankly, the big problem nutrition-wise in America is that we're not eating enough of it, just the baseline,
Right.
So there you go.
Yeah.
I want to talk to one topic that we sort of promised, at the top, which is, given how our current system works, how does that affect climate resilience?
Well, we're talking now about diversity and the ability for soil to sequester carbon. And most of our monocultures don't do that. They do the opposite. When it comes to vegetables, it's very different. And it's a bit of a confusing game, actually, when you look at it. The chemical industry believes that the efficiency that they grow vegetables in means that you are requiring less land mass to grow food, and therefore you're sequestering more carbon. You follow that logic? But that's the frame that I was talking about before. To go back to the frame that farms don't need to be net exporters of carbon. They could be net importers of carbon. They could hold carbon where it belongs in the soil, because that's actually, we eat carbon. So that's where it belongs and where it should be. And you can do that in an organic, diverse system. Unfortunately, the world has moved towards monocultures, and 67% of our land that's devoted to agriculture, 67%, is in grains. 67. Vegetables make up 6%. So if you want to just talk about environmental degradation and carbon, which I think gets you down the wrong road, because it's really, you really have to look at this holistically. People talk about how the cow is causing global climate change. It's not the cow, it's the how, as I say. It's the how. It's how are we feeding the cow? We're feeding the cow. The reason the cow today in the American system is so demonstratively bad is because of all the corn and soybeans that are grown to feed this very inefficient animal that shouldn't be eating grain. So at the end of the day, carbon's being released everywhere. Is the belching part of it? Sure. But if you were to raise that cow on a diverse grass system and you were to eat less meat, like really celebrate meat, I don't mean not eat meat. I eat a lot of meat. I eat a lot of local meat. But I eat it in keeping with the carrying capacity of the land, so that the sun feeds the grass, and the grass feeds the animal feeds us. That couldn't be more sustainable. It's also net carbon beneficial. So what a wonderful way to think about dinner. It's a whole nother frame. I like it as the deliciousness, but another frame is can you imagine if we started to think about eating lunch or dinner and you were saying, wow, this meal is net carbon negative? That's pretty great, and it's totally possible. I just think we have to think beyond vegetables to do that, because grains and animals take up such a huge part of
beef in particular. And
beef is the big one.
It is the big one. I mean, just cutting back on that alone, I think it was like a 3-ounce burger a week or something, like a 3-ounce portion a week would have huge implications that would this is several years of reporting, but I can tell you that's pretty real. Like, it's switching out, a lot of that beef for beans. Huge benefit.
Yeah, Michael Pollan, the great food journalist, once said to me many years ago on that point, what he said it much more eloquently than I'm going to say it, what the ecological world would look like if we ate a lot more beans. Yeah. And at that point, I didn't quite understand, but when you really look at beans and their leguminous possibilities, they create these things called mycorrhizal associations in root mass, and it really sucks carbon right into to the rhizome sphere, which feeds the plant sugar, and it's like it really is one of the most magical crops, and which is what built, Global South is built on corn, but it's built on beans, because beans provided that nitrogen that allowed corn to grow. So that's an example of we can't just eat corn, we got to eat beans. Every culture and cuisine in the history of the world knew what I just said. I'm not saying anything particularly interesting, actually. Everyone did. If it was Global South, the corn and beans. If it was Asia, look at Japan. Rice, twice a day is rice. But buckwheat, as a rotation into rice, was critical. You needed to break up disease cycles before there was any chemicals, and you had to grow buckwheat. Buckwheat, magical crop for that. It's actually a broadleaf. It's not even a grain. Yeah. So you're there, huge diversity. But what did the Japanese do? You create soba noodles. So you don't sit there and say, you got to eat diversity. You have to eat buckwheat. It's like you create something so delicious that it becomes what it means to be Japanese, in the same way that you eat 2 bowls of rice for lunch and dinner. And that same thing is true in India with lentils and wheat, or in North Africa with millet and wheat, anywhere, or in Eastern Europe with buckwheat and wheat. Kasha is a rotation crop to get you wheat. Beer and wheat is a possibility of getting your bread. You have to drink your beer. That's a night, though all of what I just mentioned is super delicious. Yeah. Nutritious and delicious and totally sustainable. And we in America, we've never had that dictate. Never. We were a nation of bad farmers, really. We talk about a yeoman farmer in our history. You came over here because you didn't own land. You didn't farm. That's why you came, you know? And you came to temperate climate, and you threw a seed in the ground. You did very well. You had a lot of soil fertility, and we produced a heck of a lot of food. And when the soils degraded in east of the Mississippi, we moved where? To the Midwest, and we plowed up the prairie, mostly for wheat. And when that collapsed in the 30s, farmers moved out of there, and you went west to virgin land. And it's also new. It just ended. Like, we just got to California in the 60s, for food production. Like, really, 50s and 60s. This is all so new. So the frame is like, that's why I keep coming back to. I think as eaters, we have a great lever to pull here in our diets. And if we can think about farm to table a little bit deeper than just treating, a farmer's market like a grocery aisle, and think about the correspondence between what a farmer really needs to grow in a particular region, the diversity of crops that gives this farmer strength in their soil and strength in their plants, and we can mimic that in our diet, we will go a long way towards a delicious dinner. Oof.
And a more nutritious dinner.
Yeah, and a very, very much more nutritious dinner. Yeah.
I'm just going to put in a plug for beans. But since we were talking about them, that they have ecological benefits, but actually they're super high in protein and fiber, which most Americans do not get enough of, by the way.
Great point. Loaded with it. Yeah. Good point. Lots to talk about there. Okay.
Well, we have 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have enough time for questions. So we have questions over there. Yes, the gentleman here in the checkered shirt. Can someone bring him a mic, please?
I love this. It was like watching a modern version of the 2009 film Food Inc.
Yeah.
And the botany of desire and all of the stuff I've been studying for so many years.
That's high praise. Thank you.
Say what? Oh, yeah.
High praise. Those are great.
I thought it should have won the best documentary film of the year, but The Cove won. But I really thought Food Inc. was going to win. In any case, it seems like the situation we're in is a result of rules, policies, laws that favor short-term profit at the expense of the soil, the planet, and our own nutrition. And is there anything that we can do other than go to the farmer's market and just do a little bit more good? What could be done from a policy standpoint to actually go against the bad, stop the bad, rather than just add more good? You follow me?
I totally
Fix the
follow
rules.
you. I sort of, I completely agree with you, because in 2009, I would have said, the politics doesn't go anywhere. The politics is responsive to what the culture is saying and needing and demanding. And I have changed my mind on that, because the politics have become so embedded with these multinational corporations that own our food supply. I go to seed because there's nothing more consolidated than that. But the beef industry, the grain industry, it's in consolidated hands, and you can't vote with your fork, as Michael Pollan used to say 3 times a day. You can't. You can't do it because it's too elitist, as I sort of touched on, but you can't do it because you're not powerful enough. And so, getting politicians to wake up to this is the way to go. And voting on a local level all the way up is, food is becoming much more in the political realm than it ever has been. In 2009, I was on Obama's council for the president for 8 years, and right before he was elected, I had a chance to talk to him, and I sort of said the same thing about the politics. And I'll never forget, he turned to me and said, I know those guys on the Ag Committee. And what he was talking about was red states, because red states up until 2015, all Ag Committee was all red states. You didn't go on an Ag Committee if you're a Democrat. It was Democrat. Blue states didn't farm, or didn't have the weight of farming behind them, so nobody, you weren't on those committees. And he said, "Those guys scare me. I'm not going to touch them." And I remember thinking to myself, I didn't say this to Obama in his face, but I remember thinking, you're about as popular as Jesus Christ right now. Your popularity rate is like 99%. And if you're scared of a couple of red state senators, man, you're right, you're not going near that. What he did at that moment was look to Michelle and say, you're going to do it. It's apolitical. Start a garden. And she did, and she, and that's what we were working on was this garden, and it was amazing, and it really, I think it had tremendous effect, but on the policy, it really didn't, because they got too scared, Obama and the administration, and it's being very critical of what I think was a great presidency, but not on agriculture. He got away from it, and what the problem was, he was dealing with healthcare, so he was dealing with a lot of stuff. Who am I to say? But you can't go after these. You can't go, as we're saying, it's like they're very powerful, and you got to pick your fights. And what he said to me when I was leaving, I'll never forget. He came up to me very close and said, "What you need to do is make me take on those guys. Don't rely on me to take on them. Make me take them on. So you do the work." And he put it back on me. And I thought that, that wasn't a cop-out. It was a very astute political calculation. And with Michelle, I think he was right to say apolitical. Unfortunately, when she started talking about school nutrition, look what happened. I mean, everybody, the red states came after her. You're robbing kids of anything good to eat, no chocolate milk, tomato ketchup is a vegetable, all this. So they got the hell away from that. And then she launched Let's Move, which was all about physical. You couldn't talk about nutrition anymore. You just shut down. And it was all like, which was great. But exercise is one part of it. Nutrition is the biggest part. Anyway, sorry.
That's true. Oh, that's true. Although, there were some changes to school lunch made, but not nearly as much as
I think they've been rolled back as far as I have seen under our last president.
I want to make a note of your question. I actually asked that same question to Dan before our panel. And he said, well, that's why we're having this conversation, to raise awareness, to have people who are stakeholders in various industries who care about health, right, to make the case, right?
I think that's right, and I think looking to food companies more and more, because they're more than politicians, they're responsive to the public. Here, look, I don't want to be so negative, okay? Here's a positive. I talked about the 190 million acres of corn and soybeans, okay? Here's what happened in the last 15 years. If we were sitting here 15 years ago, and I said to you, there's going to be a craft beer bonanza in this country, okay? And you in the home of Coors would have said, okay, let's think about that. There are 3 beer companies, and they command about 85% of the beer market. The idea that craft brew is really going to scale, not possible. Okay, well, now here we are today. Craft beer industry is 47% of the beer industry. Craft means essentially regional and small. The other thing it means is local barley. Now, why am I bringing that up? I'm bringing that up because the craft breweries don't do something called junk malting. So when Anheuser-Busch or Coors or any of these, they malt for the beer, it's complete junk. It's rice that you can't eat, broken rice, or it's wheat that can't even feed animals. And they make this sludge, and that's the malt that makes our beer, and it's very weak, which is why you get weak beer. But malt, the independents, these regional craft brewers, no way, can't do that. And they didn't want to import malted barley from Europe, which is where most of the good barley is made. And so they demanded that farmers, and paid a handsome price for farmers to grow barley. And overnight, barley became a very important crop amidst those 190 million acres. Now, is it 5 million acres? No, but it's growing towards that. The reason I say it's so important is because something that in the span of essentially a decade went from 0 to 60 and seems to be continuing. And not only were people demanding flavor in their beer overnight and in huge numbers, but they were demanding a kind of crop that we really need to be growing more of. Barley's a magical crop as a rotation crop. I'll give you one statistic, the latest one I read. Introducing barley into corn and soybean rotation cuts down carbon emissions by 45% per acre.
Wow.
45, not 4%, 45%. Mix in barley, and you go another 15%. Just like that. So, in the span of 10 years, we're growing on a couple million acres barley. I would prefer us to eat the barley than make beer of it, but I love a good beer, the regional beer. And we have, by the way, woken up the breeding of the nonprofits for barley. University of North Dakota, University of Minnesota. They all now have money flowing into their barley breeding departments that disappeared in the 60s, 70s, but have now been rejuvenated. So there's money flowing there. There's money flowing to distributors because they've got the regional beers that everybody wants. And there's money flowing to farmers, incentivizing them to grow it. And to me, in a decade, that's a very promising story about what's possible if we, as a culture, demand the right kind of ingredients.
I think we're going to have to end it there, but I love the fact that we're ending it looking for hope in the bottom of a pint glass.
Drink a beer tonight. Let's do that.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.